The Alaskan Malamute looks like the ultimate symbol of the modern North, built for power and endurance. But look deeper, beneath the fur and the muscle, and a hidden genetic trail tells a completely different story. Scientists just uncovered DNA markers that prove this breed isn't just a recent invention. It carries an ancient, unsettled history that has been hiding in plain sight. Today, we're decoding exactly what that ancient DNA reveals about the true origins of the Malamute. That is why this breed resists a simple origin story. A glance can make the Alaskan Malamute seem obvious. A strong sled dog, shaped by work, preserved by function, and carried forward by human need. But the DNA adds a second layer, one that is quieter and far more unsettling. It says that the dog standing in front of us may be closer to older Arctic lineages than its modern label suggests. It suggests continuity is measurable, not mythical. It says the North did not merely produce a type, it conserved a history. Once that comes into view, the question sharpens. If a 2013 study could trace a shared genetic thread across ancient and modern Arctic dogs, what other traits in the Alaskan Malamute have been mistaken for recent appearance alone? What part of its temperament, its build, its endurance, was already taking shape in dogs that lived long before the breed had a name? The answer does not arrive all at once. It hangs in that A31 signal, in the archaeological dates, in the quiet fact that old bones and living dogs can still speak the same genetic language. To see the Malamute clearly from here is to realize that its history is not simply preserved in records or memory. It is written into the body itself, waiting for science to read what the North never forgot. On February 24, 2021, nature drew attention to a bone fragment so unremarkable at first glance that it could have been dismissed forever. It came from a cave in southeast Alaska, from a layer of time that reached back roughly 10,000 years. Only after DNA analysis did the fragment give up its identity. It belonged to a domestic dog. That single result shifted the ground beneath a familiar story, proving dogs were present in the North American Arctic far earlier than we once imagined. For the Alaskan Malamute, that matters in a very specific way. The question is no longer whether a powerful Arctic dog like this fits a late frontier history of travel, hauling, and human survival. The deeper question is whether its roots tap into a much older northern world, one in which dogs were already living beside people on a landscape of ice, coastlines, and long seasonal movement. A fragment in a cave cannot prove the full ancestry of the modern Malamute, but it does force the timeline backward with undeniable force. That is why this discovery feels less like a footnote than a reset. A bone that had rested in darkness for millennia became evidence that the canine story in the far north did not begin with written records, kennel clubs, or the neat boundaries of breed history. It began in a living Arctic environment where dogs were already part of daily endurance. The 10,000-year date matters because it reaches beyond appearance and beyond assumption, into a period when the relationship between people and dogs was being shaped under harsher conditions than any modern pedigree can fully capture. With that window open, the Malamute shifts, no longer just an isolated symbol, but a survivor of something far older. Its heavy frame, its cold weather resilience, even the quiet intelligence that makes it feel less like a decorative breed and more like a working memory, all of that now sits beneath a deeper horizon. The 2021 Nature report did not claim to identify the bone as a Malamute ancestor. It did something more important. It showed that the genetic history of Arctic dogs in Alaska reaches into an ancient past that modern eyes had underestimated. That changes the emotional center of the story. Instead of a breed standing neatly on top of recent history, there is now the unsettling possibility of continuity stretching across thousands of years. A cave in southeast Alaska, a 10,000-year-old fragment, a DNA result that transformed a piece of bone into a witness. These details do more than lengthen the timeline. They suggest that the northern dog was already embedded in the human world of the region long before the modern Malamute took shape, and that the breed's familiar strength may be carrying an inheritance older than its name. The bone did not look remarkable at first. It sat in the evidence of a cave in the southeast Alaska, quiet, weathered, easy to mistake for something else. For a long time, that is exactly what happened. In the field it was read as bear. In the record it stayed that way until the science caught up with the assumption. Then the DNA spoke, and the label broke. On February 23, 2021, Smithsonian Magazine reported that a 10,150-year-old bone fragment from that cave had been reclassified after DNA analysis. It was not from a bear at all. It was from a domestic dog, now described as the oldest known in the Americas. That single correction changed more than a catalogue entry. It showed that a careful surface reading can hide the very thing history needs most, a second look. And for the Alaskan Malamute, that matters in a very specific way. The breed's public image is built on muscle, winter air, and the hard certainty of a sled dog that looks as if it were shaped by ice alone. But this find suggests that the line behind that image is older, stranger, and more fragile than appearance can admit. A bone that looked like a bear had to be reopened by genetics before it could be understood as a dog. In the same way, the Malamute's ancestry cannot be reduced to what the eye expects from an Arctic worker. The reclassification also shifts the emotional weight of the story. It is not just about age. It is about how many lives may have been misread because their evidence was too incomplete, too eroded, too easy to name too quickly. A fragment can carry the wrong identity for centuries of interpretation. Yet inside that mistake, the true timeline waits. The oldest known domestic dog in the Americas was not announced by shape, size, or an obvious pedigree. It was recovered through comparison, patience, and the discipline to question what had already been accepted. That is where the Malamute begins to feel less like a modern breed standing apart from the past, and more like a witness that survived the same long concealment. Its ancestry does not arrive as a clean line. It arrives through correction, through a bone once called bear, through a record rewritten by DNA, through the unsettling possibility that the North has been keeping its canine history hidden in plain sight, all along. If you want to see how far that hidden history reaches, stay with the next layer, because the reclassification is only the point where the deeper pattern starts to show its shape. In 2015, a paper in PLOS One brought the argument into sharper focus. It looked at the origins of Native American dog breeds and found pre-Columbian roots across the group, with only limited replacement by European dogs later on. That matters, because it turns a vague sense of age into something measurable. The dogs were not recent inventions shaped only by colonial contact. Their lines reached back before that break, and the genetic signal still carried the trace. For the Alaskan Malamute, though, that result did something more delicate than simply settle the story. It confirmed old ancestry without flattening the differences between breeds. The study supported the idea that the Malamute belongs to an ancient northern world, yet it also showed that broad evidence is not identical to direct proof for every line within that world. In other words, the dog's age became easier to defend, but its exact path remained too important to blur. That distinction is the point where certainty and restraint meet. A breed can be old and still not be fully explained. It can carry deep continuity and still have gaps in the record. The PLOS One analysis made that tension visible by placing the Alaskan Malamute inside a wider family of dogs with pre-Columbian ancestry, while leaving room for later shifts, selective pressure, and regional survival that may have reshaped the line in ways a single comparison cannot untangle. So the image changes again. The Malamute is no longer standing alone as a frozen symbol of Arctic endurance, nor is it reduced to a modern show of power and coat. It now appears as part of a longer biological chain, one that survived European replacement better than many histories once assumed. Yet the deeper lesson is that preservation does not mean stasis. Ancient bloodlines can remain visible while still moving through time, still adapting, still absorbing losses and changes without surrendering their identity. That is why the 2015 paper feels so important. It did not close the book. It opened a narrower, more honest chapter. It said that the ancient North is present in these dogs, but it also warned that presence is not the same as a complete map. The Alaskan Malamute carries that contradiction in a way that feels almost fitting. Old enough to challenge modern assumptions, distinct enough to resist easy labels, and still unfinished enough to keep science looking closer. And that unfinished quality is what gives the breed its lasting force. A dog shaped for hard ground and colder winds does not need a perfect origin story to feel ancient. It only needs enough evidence to show that its past is deeper than appearance, deeper than breeding records, deeper than the simple stories people once told about how northern dogs came to be. Here, the proof is partial, but it is real. It confirms ancestry, It narrows the mystery, and then it leaves one final layer waiting in the dark. How much of that old Arctic inheritance still lives in the modern Alaskan Malamute today? Under the white glare of the northern route, the most revealing detail is not the size of the dogs, but the family resemblance hidden in their blood. In 2015, a study published in PLOS One placed the Alaskan Malamute beside the Siberian Husky and the Alaskan Husky, and the result was more unsettling than a simple pedigree chart. These animals did not appear as separate islands of history. They lined up as close relatives, tied to the sled dogs of Chukotka in Siberia, as if the far edge of Asia had left a fingerprint inside the modern North. That finding matters because it changes the scale of the question. The earlier DNA evidence had already pushed the story away from surface appearances. This one pushes it across water, across ice, across a corridor of movement that once connected Siberia and Alaska through human need and animal endurance. The Malamute no longer sits at the end of a tidy American tale. It stands inside a larger Arctic network, one that links working dogs to a region where survival depended on animals built for hauling, cold air, and long travel. The study does not say every detail is solved. It says something narrower and stronger. The genetic neighborhood of these breeds points back toward Chukotka. That is why the comparison is so powerful. It gives the breed a geography that is older than kennel names and cleaner than folklore. Instead of imagining a single origin in a modern registry, the evidence suggests continuity from a broader sled dog world on the Siberian side of the Bering region. For a viewer, that shift is easy to feel. The coat, the frame, the calm force in the shoulders suddenly look less like decorative traits and more like inherited answers to a hard climate that crossed borders without asking permission. And yet the 2015 paper also leaves room for a more human truth. A lineage can be shared without being frozen in place. Dogs moved with people, adapted to different tasks, and passed through changing populations. That means the Malamute carries more than one kind of memory at once. The memory of northern labor and the memory of contact between communities separated by geography but joined by necessity. If you are seeing the breed as a living archive, this is the page where the archive opens wider. The old assumption was that a sled dog history had to be local to Alaska. The evidence says the story was already wider than that, written along routes that touched Chukotka long before modern boundaries tried to make the map feel complete. Look closely at what this does to the familiar image. The breed remains unmistakably Arctic, but now that Arctic identity is no longer vague, it is anchored to a published comparison, to a 2015 PLOS One analysis, and to a set of dogs whose closest echoes reach into Siberia. That does not flatten the mystery, it sharpens it. Because once the Malamute is seen as part of a shared northern web, the next question becomes harder and more personal. How much of that old crossing still lives in the animal standing before us now, in the way it moves, waits, and endures without drama? The answer is not a slogan. It is a lineage that kept its shape by changing just enough to survive. And that is why this connection to Chukotka feels so important. It confirms the continuity, but it also opens a deeper layer behind it. One where the Alaskan Malamute is no longer read as a closed chapter. It is a bridge, carrying Siberian echoes into the modern Arctic and holding them there in plain sight. On July 22, 2010, BMC Genetics put a hard edge on a question that had lingered in the background for years. The study did not treat Alaskan sled dogs as polished symbols of a single timeless type. It treated them as working animals shaped under pressure, built for performance first, with appearance left behind. That detail shifts the emotional weight of everything that came before. If ancient DNA was already showing a long northern inheritance, this later genetic work explains why so much of that inheritance could survive inside a population that was never left untouched. The paper looked at the genetic composition and performance improvement of Alaskan sled dogs and found something more practical than romantic. These animals were developed for what they could do, not for how closely they matched a breed ideal. Over time, several established breeds were brought into the sled dog population to strengthen racing performance. That means the modern dog standing in snow is not a frozen relic. It is the result of careful human choices, repeated across generations, each one aimed at speed, endurance, and reliability under brutal conditions. And that is where the deeper pattern becomes visible. Ancient DNA can point to continuity in the far past, but the 2010 study shows another force at work much later. deliberate selection that pressed the population in a different direction without erasing its northern core. The result is a lineage with two timelines running at once. One belongs to the old Arctic world of survival, migration, and partnership. The other belongs to breeders, handlers, and race teams who wanted stronger pulls, faster runs, and animals that could keep going when the weather turned hostile. That combination matters because it prevents a lazy conclusion. The presence of introduced breeds does not cancel the older ancestry. It explains how the same stock could be refined for work while still carrying echoes of something much older inside it. The Alaskan Malamute emerges here not as a museum piece, but as a living record of use. Its body remembers the North because the North rewarded power and patience, yet its recent history also remembers human intervention, selection, and adaptation shaped by competition. Seen this way, the science does something almost unsettling. It confirms continuity, but it also reveals editing. What survives is not only what was inherited, it is what remained useful enough to be protected, crossed, and carried forward. In that sense, the modern dog is both preservation and construction at once. If this is the part of the story that feels hidden, stay with it, because the next layer pushes even further into the tension between what was kept and what was changed, and the answer becomes more personal the closer it gets to the animal itself. What makes the BMC genetics result so revealing is the way it reorders the timeline. Ancient DNA had already suggested that the roots of northern dogs reach back far beyond modern kennel history, but the 2010 analysis shows that the present form was still actively being shaped long after those roots were established. That is why the Malamute's identity feels so stable and so unfinished at the same time. Stability came from function. Unfinishedness came from the fact that people kept adjusting the line to meet new demands. A working dog does not survive by looking ancient. It survives by remaining effective, and when several established breeds are introduced into a sled dog population to improve racing performance, the result is not a loss of meaning. It is proof that the line was important enough to be refined. The old Arctic inheritance did not vanish under selection pressure. It was measured against it, preserved through it, and given a new form that could still pull forward in snow, wind, and distance. That is the quiet reversal at the heart of this chapter. The Alaskan Malamute is not only ancient because science says so. It is ancient because usefulness kept dragging the past into the present, again and again, until heritage and labor became impossible to separate. And once that is understood, the breed stops looking like a simple remnant of the North. It starts to look like a survivor of constant decisions, carrying old genetic memory inside a body shaped by modern hands. In the samples from Alaska and Greenland, the surprise was not simply that old dog bones still carried a readable signal. It was that a single mitochondrial signature kept surfacing again and again. In 2013, a study in the Journal of Archaeological Science examined ancient and modern Arctic dogs from those regions and found a high frequency of haplotype A31 in archaeological material dating from roughly 1250 to 1910 CE, alongside modern dogs from Greenland. The match did not look accidental. It pointed to continuity across centuries, a thread that survived hunting camps, coastal movement, and the long pressure of Arctic life. That detail changes the tone of the whole search. Before this, the question felt like a hunt for an origin point, as if one clean answer might be hiding beneath the snow. But A31 refuses that simplicity. It shows that some genetic lines did not disappear when habits changed or when new dogs arrived. They persisted. They crossed generations quietly, without announcing themselves in the shape of a muzzle or the thickness of a coat. A dog could be rebuilt by preference and still carry an older maternal line inside it. And yet, that is where the deeper problem begins. Continuity is not the same as completion. A recurring haplotype tells us that ancient Arctic dogs and living dogs in Greenland share a measurable connection, but it does not by itself reconstruct the full path to the Alaskan Malamute. It cannot tell us everything about the males that entered a population, the working lines that were favored, or the moments when selection altered the surface while leaving older ancestry in place. The record is real, but it is partial, and the partiality matters. That is why the Malamute becomes more interesting, not less. A breed usually gets flattened into an image, a heavy coat, a broad head, a body built for pull and cold. But the genetic trace from Alaska and Greenland suggests something more delicate beneath that image. Some features were inherited as function, others as memory, and the two do not always move together. One generation may preserve a line in the mitochondria, while another reshapes behavior, size, or stamina through breeding decisions that leave no simple mark in a museum drawer. The Journal of Archaeological Science study makes that tension visible. It places the ancient North in the present tense without pretending the case is closed. A31 becomes a sign that Arctic dogs were never frozen in one form. They adapted, mixed, endured, and still carried forward a recognizable biological echo. For anyone looking closely, that echo is more revealing than a neat origin myth. It says the past was not erased, it was layered. If this kind of continuity is what survived, then the real question shifts. Not just where the Alaskan Malamute came from, but how much of the old Arctic world still moves through it now. The answer is not a banner or a fixed label. It is a living trace, subtle enough to miss if you expect a dramatic reveal, strong enough to reshape the entire frame once it is seen. And that is the quiet power of the A31 signal. It does not finish the mystery. It makes the mystery larger. In a clinic far from the Arctic, the signs arrived quietly. A young Alaskan Malamute would stumble, lose strength, and then recover just enough to make the problem seem uncertain until the pattern returned in another dog, and then another. The breed that looked so complete in snow and harness was carrying something far less visible, a disorder that had been sleeping inside its lineage. In 2017, Acta Veterinaria Scandinavica examined the reappearance of hereditary polyneuropathy in Alaskan Malamutes in Scandinavia and found a homozygous mutation in the NDRG1 gene in both recent and historical cases. That detail changed the meaning of the illness. It was not simply a new clinical event. It was a genetic thread moving through time, silent in carriers, hidden in family lines, and suddenly readable when enough evidence gathered in one place. That is the unsettling part. A recessive allele can travel for generations without announcing itself. Breeders may see healthy parents, healthy litters, healthy years, and still the trait remains embedded, waiting for the right pairing to expose it. In the Malamute, the disease did not appear as a break from history. It appeared as history itself, returning with a different face. The body became a record of what the pedigree could not say on its own, and once that door opens, the story grows darker and more precise. The same breed once admired for endurance and Arctic purpose is also revealing how inheritance can preserve vulnerability alongside strength. A lineage can carry beauty, function, and risk in the same hidden architecture. The old assumption was that a working dog's past could be read from its silhouette alone. This evidence says otherwise. The real past may be lodged in nerves, in proteins, in a mutation that moved quietly through breeding decisions no one thought would matter. Seen that way, the Alaskan Malamute is not only a survivor of the North, it is a living archive of what selection keeps, what it overlooks, and what returns after years of silence. The disease does not diminish the breed's identity. It reveals how deep that identity runs. If a dog can inherit a task, it can also inherit a flaw, both stemming from the same ancient continuity. That is why this case feels larger than a veterinary report. It turns ancestry into something tactile, almost intimate, and reminds us that a bloodline is never only a record of origin. It is also a path by which memory, burden, and resilience keep moving forward. By the time Smithsonian Magazine published its report on June 25, 2020, the picture had already become impossible to compress into a simple breed story. The genetic evidence pointed to something older and more durable than a kennel record. Modern Arctic sled dogs, including huskies and Alaskan Malamutes, descending from a lineage established in Siberia roughly 9,500 years ago, a partnership old enough to have helped people survive in the Arctic ever since. That detail changes the scale of the whole conversation. The Alaskan Malamute is no longer standing at the edge of history, waiting to be explained by recent breeding alone. It is already inside a much older current, one that moved across the North long before modern registries and show rings gave names to its shape. That is why ancient DNA matters so much here. It does not merely add a scientific footnote to an admired dog. It separates memory from guesswork. It shows that some traits in the Alaskan Malamute were not borrowed from modern fashion or rescued by chance, but carried forward through long pressure, movement, and human need. Other traits were surely reshaped later, because no living breed remains untouched. Yet the deeper message is not loss. It is continuity with variation. The body we see now is not a museum copy of the past, but a working inheritance, refined by time without being severed from its roots. Seen through that lens, the breed's strength takes on a different meaning. Its endurance is not only muscular, its loyalty is not only behavioral, even its cold weather command feels less like a decorative feature, and more like the visible edge of an ancestry built for hard places and shared survival. The science does not flatten the Alaskan Malamute into data, it makes the dog more vivid. It tells us that the face turning into the wind today is shaped by a history that began far beyond the modern Arctic map, in a line of dogs and people learning to move together through severe land, distance, and hunger. And that is the quiet shock at the center of the discovery. Ancient DNA does not strip the Alaskan Malamute of its identity. It gives that identity depth. It shows a breed that is both modern and ancient, both altered and preserved, both specific and widely connected to the old northern world. The silhouette still matters, but now it carries more than image. It carries survival, adaptation, and the long echo of a Siberian beginning that science is only now making fully visible. If this deep dive into the Malamute's hidden past changed how you see the breed, let me know in the comments below. Do you see your dog differently now? Don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into the secrets hidden in plain sight.